My wife secretly signed my business over to her deadbeat ex and texted, "Don't overreact." The email arrived at 11:14 p.m. while I was brushing my teeth. Legal documents attached. We went a different route. The boys want their real dad on the LLC paperwork. Greg is taking your equity. I stared at the screen. No warning, no discussion, just a finalized contract sent over like I was a dismissed contractor. I had spent 11 months gutting and rebuilding that downtown storefront, picked up endless weekend consulting gigs at my software firm to fund the commercial kitchen equipment I'd just ordered. Deep fryers, ventilation hoods, custom prep tables, $115,000 total, paid from my personal savings, my signature on the vendor contracts, my name on the building deed. But Liam and Mason's names were on the restaurant marquee. And now, Greg, the guy who vanished to Florida a decade ago and only slinked back last Christmas, was suddenly the 50% partner. I walked to the kitchen and opened my safe. I pulled out the property deed and the vendor agreements. 2 years of covering every single household bill so my wife Chloe could help the boys build their culinary dream. Mortgage, utilities, her leased Audi, their health insurance. My phone lit up. It was Chloe. "Don't overreact. Greg just wants to build a legacy with his sons. You get it, right?" I replied. "Have a great grand opening." Then I got to work. First, the restaurant supply company canceled the $42,000 equipment delivery scheduled for Tuesday. They charged a 15% restocking fee, but it was worth it. Next, the contractors canceled the final electrical inspections. By 3 a.m., I logged into our joint accounts and transferred exactly my original capital minus my half of the living expenses into a private account. The next afternoon, I met with a commercial real estate broker. The building was strictly in my name, purchased long before the wedding. I want it listed immediately. Cash buyers only. Within 48 hours, a corporate coffee chain made an aggressive all-cash offer. I accepted and signed the transfer documents. Liam texted me on Thursday. "Bro, the delivery truck never showed up with the stoves. What gives?" "The card on file was mine," I replied. "You need to use the LLC's funds now." Chloe called, furious. "Why are you sabotaging their launch week?" "I'm not sabotaging anything," I said calmly. "You wanted this to be a family business. I'm stepping out of your family's way. You're throwing a tantrum over paperwork. I'm protecting my assets," I replied. "You made your choice." 3 weeks later, I was living in a sleek, high-rise condo in downtown Seattle, 400 miles away, at exactly 4 p.m. On the day of their highly advertised grand opening, my phone started ringing endlessly. 22 missed calls, a flood of frantic texts. "Where is the equipment? Why are the doors chained shut?" At 5:30 p.m., Chloe called from an unknown number. "What did you do?" "The locks are changed and there's a demolition crew here." "I sold the property," I said. "It's not my building anymore. You'll have to ask the new owners." "But the restaurant, where are the boys supposed to cook?" "That's Greg's problem now. He's the equity partner. Have him secure a new lease." There was a long, hollow silence. "Greg vanished," she whispered. "He took the $30,000 small business loan the boys took out and emptied the operating account this morning. We can't reach him." I couldn't suppress a dark smile. "He robbed his own kids. Incredible." "We are ruined," she sobbed. "We have investors demanding answers. You have to come back and fix this." "Call a lawyer," I told her. "You chose Greg as your partner. You got the full Greg experience. I am officially retired from funding your mistakes." 2 months into my new life, her attorney sent a demand letter trying to claim a percentage of the building's sale. My lawyer laughed it out of court in a single afternoon. Since the deed predated the marriage and they never paid rent, they had absolutely zero legal standing. The silence that followed the court victory was the best thing I'd heard in years. No more frantic texts, no more urgent calls about plumbing issues or payroll shortfalls for a business that wasn't even mine anymore. I settled into my routine in Seattle. The rain was constant, gray and rhythmic, which suited my mood perfectly. I worked my software job during the day and spent my evenings in a quiet apartment that stayed exactly how I left it. No half-finished DIY projects for someone else's kids. No passive-aggressive comments about how I wasn't present enough even though I was the one paying for the roof over our heads. Then, about 6 months after the sale, a thick manila envelope arrived via certified mail. I expected more legal threats from Chloe, maybe some desperate attempt at alimony since her lifestyle had taken a massive nosedive. But when I opened it, it wasn't from a lawyer. It was from Liam, the older son. Inside was a printed spreadsheet and a handwritten note. The note was short. "We didn't know about the loan. Mom told us you'd already signed off on Greg being a partner. We thought you were okay with it. We're sorry. Here is the list of people we still owe. Greg didn't just take the $30K. He took the deposits for the local farmers and the down payment for the meat supplier. They're coming after us personally because we signed the guarantees." I sat at my kitchen island, looking at the numbers. It was a mess. They owed about $85,000 to various local vendors, small businesses, people I'd shaken hands with when I was still the one managing the renovation. These weren't corporate giants. They were families. Liam and Mason, in their 20-year-old arrogance and desperation to please their biological father, had signed personal guarantee forms for every credit line. Chloe, in her infinite wisdom, had encouraged it to build their credit. I put the papers down and stared out at the sound. I didn't owe them anything. Legally, I was a ghost. Morally, I'd been betrayed in a way that should have burned every bridge I ever built. But I knew those vendors. I knew Miller, the guy who did the custom woodwork. I knew Sarah, who ran the organic farm 3 towns over. They were being squeezed because my ex-wife and her deadbeat ex-husband were incompetent and malicious. I didn't call Liam back. I didn't want to give him hope. Instead, I called Miller. "Hey, it's Mark," I said when he picked up. The silence on the other end was cold. "You got a lot of nerve, Mark. That check for the cabinetry bounced twice. My wife's been calling that office number and it's disconnected. We're out $9,000. "I know," I said. "Look, Miller, I don't own the business. I don't own the building. I'm not the one who stiffed you, but I'm the one who told you to take the job. Doesn't pay my mortgage," he snapped. "I'm sending you a wire for the full amount plus 10% for the trouble," I said. "On one condition. You don't tell Liam or Chloe where it came from. If they ask, tell them an anonymous investor settled the debt to avoid a lawsuit, and you send me a signed release saying the debt is satisfied." I did this for 3 days. I went down the list, one by one. I spent nearly $100,000 of the profit I'd made from the building sale. It wasn't wasn't about being a nice guy. It was about cleaning up my own reputation in a town I might one day want to return to. And it was about making sure those kids, as stupid as they were, didn't have their entire lives ruined before they hit 25. But then things got complicated. A week later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I thought it was another vendor I'd missed. Mark? It was Chloe. Her voice sounded different, thin, brittle. I told you to talk to my lawyer, Chloe, I said, my thumb hovering over the end call button. Wait, please. I'm not calling about the money. Well, I am, but not like before. The boys, they told me someone paid the vendors. All of them. They think it was Greg. They think he felt guilty and sent the money back anonymously. I felt a cold pit form in my stomach. And you're calling me to tell me Greg is a hero now? No, she said, and I heard her breath hitch. I'm calling because Greg showed up at the house this morning. He heard the debts were paid. He thinks the boys still have the loan money hidden somewhere. He's staying on the couch, Mark. He won't leave. He says he's a partner in the LLC and he has a right to be there. The boys are so happy to see him, they won't listen to me. They think he came back to save them. He's a leech, Chloe. You invited him in. I know, she whispered. But Mark, he's starting to talk about restarting the business. He wants them to take out another loan. He's telling them he can get the building back from the coffee company. He's filling their heads with garbage and they're looking at him like he's a god. Not my problem, I said. He found the paperwork, she said, her voice dropping to a near silent murmur. The release forms the vendors sent. Miller's form had your personal bank's routing number on the wire confirmation that was attached by mistake. Greg knows it was you. He's telling the boys you're trying to buy your way back in to manipulate them. He's using your own money to turn them against you even more. I hung up. I didn't even say goodbye. I sat in my expensive, quiet apartment and realized that my clean break had a massive leak. I'd tried to do a quiet, decent thing to clear my conscience, and it had backfired into a weapon for a man who didn't have a conscience at all. 2 days later, I received a message on LinkedIn. It was from a guy named Vince. I recognized the name. He was the investor Greg had supposedly brought in before I left. Hey Mark, Greg told me you're looking to settle the remaining LLC liabilities. I've got the paperwork for the private bridge loan I gave the boys. Since you're playing Santa Claus for the local vendors, I figured you'd want to settle this $50,000 before we have to involve the courts. Greg says you're good for it. I looked at the message. Then I looked at the attached loan agreement. It wasn't a bank document. It was a predatory private contract with a 25% interest rate, signed by Liam and Mason, and witnessed by Greg. I realized then that Greg wasn't just a deadbeat. He was a predator who had found a way to use my own sense of responsibility against me. He wasn't just living on their couch. He was setting up a trap. If I didn't pay Vince, they'd sue the boys. If I did pay Vince, I was essentially giving Greg and his buddy a $50,000 payday for doing nothing but ruining a family. I needed to see what was happening for myself. I didn't want to, but I couldn't sit in Seattle and watch my bank account get bled dry by a guy I'd never even met. I drove back. I didn't go to the house. I went to the old storefront. The corporate coffee chain hadn't started demolition yet. The coming soon signs were in the windows, but the building was still exactly as I'd left it. As I sat in my car across the street, I saw a familiar beat-up SUV pull into the loading zone. Greg got out. He looked exactly like the photos Chloe used to hide weathered, wearing a shirt that cost more than his car and carrying himself with the unearned confidence of a man who has never worked a day in his life. Then Mason got out of the passenger side. He looked exhausted. He looked like a kid who had aged 10 years in 6 months. They stood in front of the building, and Greg was gesturing wildly at the windows, pointing at the roof, slapping Mason on the back. My phone buzzed. A text from Mason. Dad, Greg says you're trying to sue us for the building back. He says you paid the vendors to make us look weak in court. Why can't you just let us have this? I didn't reply. I watched from the car as Greg pulled a key out of his pocket, a key I knew shouldn't work, and jiggled the lock on the side door. He couldn't get it open. He started getting frustrated, kicking the base of the door. Mason looked around nervously, clearly uncomfortable. I realized Greg didn't have a plan. He was just a con artist running out of road. But the problem with con artists is that when they hit the end of the road, they don't stop. They just grab whoever is closest to them and pull them over the edge too. I started the car and drove to the one place I knew Greg couldn't follow, the local sheriff's office. Not to report a crime, not yet. I went to see an old friend who worked in the records department. I need to see the corporate filings for a new LLC, I told her. It's called G&S Hospitality. She pulled it up. Registered 3 weeks ago, she said. Registered agents are Liam and Mason. But look at the secondary address for service. I leaned in. The address wasn't the restaurant. It wasn't Chloe's house. It was a P.O. box in a town 3 hours away, the same town where Vince was based. Greg wasn't just trying to get my money. He was setting the boys up to be the fall guys for a series of fraudulent business filings. If the investors sued, they'd be suing the boys LLC, not Greg. He'd disappear with the settlement money I paid, and the boys would be left with the legal fallout of a fraudulent company. I walked out of the station and my phone rang. It was Miller, the woodworker. Mark, I shouldn't be telling you this, he said, sounding panicked. But Greg was just here. He tried to get me to sign a statement saying you coerced me into accepting that payment. He offered me $2,000 to say you were trying to buy my testimony for a divorce case. He's trying to build a harassment suit against you. Did you take it? I asked. Hell no, Miller said. But Mark, he's desperate. He's told the boys that if they don't get a settlement from you by Friday, the investors are going to take the house. Chloe's house. He's got them terrified. I looked at the coming soon sign across the street one last time. I realized I couldn't just pay people off anymore. Every time I tried to solve a problem with a check, Greg just found a way to turn the paper into a knife. I drove to Chloe's house. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just pulled into the driveway. Her Audi, the one I used to pay for, was gone. In its place was a rusted-out sedan with Florida plates. I walked up to the front door and knocked. Mason opened it. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the kid I'd raised for a decade. Then his face hardened. Greg said you'd come. He said you'd try to intimidate us. Where is he, Mason? He's in the backyard with Mom. We're celebrating. We've got a new lead on a space. I pushed past him. I didn't care about being polite anymore. I walked through the kitchen I'd remodeled, and out the sliding glass door. Greg was sitting in my old lawn chair, a beer in his hand, laughing at something Chloe was saying. Chloe looked terrible. She'd lost weight, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked like someone who had realized she'd made a deal with the devil and was trying to convince herself the fire was actually a cozy cozy hearth. They both froze when they saw me. Mark? Chloe gasped, standing up. What are you doing here? Greg didn't stand up. He just smirked and leaned back. The golden goose arrives. Right on time. We were just talking about you, buddy. About how much you owe these boys for the emotional distress of selling their dream out from under them. I didn't look at Chloe. I looked straight at Greg. I have the wire transfer records, Greg. I have the signed releases from the vendors, and I have the LinkedIn messages from your buddy Vince. Greg's smirk didn't flicker. So? You paid some bills. Generous guy. Doesn't change the fact that you're harassing my family. It's not just the bills, I said, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket. I stopped by the bank on the way here. The one where the boys took out that $30,000 loan. You remember that loan, right? The one you lost? They're adults, Greg said. They handled the money. If they lost it, that's on them. Except the bank records show the funds weren't withdrawn in cash, I said. They were transferred to an account held by a holding company called Florida Sun Management. Want to guess who the sole officer of that company is? Chloe turned to Greg. What? You said the money was seized by the IRS because of Mark's old business taxes. She'll believe anything, won't she? I said to Greg. Greg finally stood up. He was taller than me, but he felt thin, brittle, like his voice. You're bluffing. You don't have those records. They're private. They were private, I said, until I informed the bank's fraud department that the primary borrowers, Mason and Liam, are claiming they never authorized that transfer. Since I was the one who co-signed their original savings accounts 10 years ago, the bank was very happy to talk to me when I suggested there might be elder or, in this case, youth financial exploitation happening. Mason had followed me outside and was standing by the door. Greg, what is he talking about? You said the IRS took it. Greg looked at Mason, then at Chloe, then back at me. The smirk was gone. Now he just looked like a cornered animal. I was protecting it, Greg said, his voice rising. I was keeping it safe so the lawyers couldn't touch it. I was going to give it back once the investor deal was finalized. There is no investor, I said. Vince is your cousin, Greg. I looked him up. He's a 2-bit process server in Orlando. There is no $50,000 bridge loan. It was just a way to squeeze more money out of me. The silence in the backyard was heavy. Chloe looked like she was going to faint. Liam came out of the house then, looking between all of us. Is it true? Liam asked. Greg didn't answer. He just grabbed his beer and took a long swig. You guys are ungrateful. I come back here, I try to give you a future, and you listen to this. This suit? The guy who abandoned you the second things got tough? I didn't abandon them, I said quietly. I stopped paying for their mistakes. There's a difference. I turned to the boys. The bank is opening a formal investigation tomorrow morning. They'll be calling you. If you lie to them to protect him, you're complicit in wire fraud. If you tell the truth, you might get some of that money back, but Greg goes to jail. I looked at Chloe. And as for the house, I checked the deed on this too. It's in both our names. I haven't paid the mortgage in 4 months, Chloe. I assumed you were handling it with all that equity you were so worried about, but the bank sent a pre-foreclosure notice to my office in Seattle yesterday. Chloe's face went white. You didn't pay it? Why would I asked. I don't live here, and according to your text, I shouldn't overreact to major financial changes. I figured you had a plan. Greg's a partner, right? Let him pay it. Greg looked at the house, then at the rusted car in the driveway. He realized the well wasn't just dry, it was being dismantled. This is bullshit, Greg muttered. He started walking toward the house. I'm not staying here to be lectured by a guy who buys his friends. The Florida plates on that car are expired. Greg, I called out as he reached the door, and the sheriff's deputy I spoke to earlier seemed very interested in why a man with an outstanding warrant for child support in 3 counties is driving around our town. Greg didn't even look back. He ran through the house. 30 seconds later, we heard the rusted sedan roar to life and screech out of the driveway. Liam and Mason stood there, looking at the empty space where their real dad had been. Chloe sank into the lawn chair Greg had just vacated. She put her head in her hands and started to sob. What do we do? Mason asked. He wasn't looking at his mother. He was looking at me. You're going to the bank tomorrow, I said. You're going to tell the truth, and then you're going to get jobs. Real jobs. Not executive chef roles at a restaurant that doesn't exist. You're going to work at the coffee shop that's opening in my old building. I happen to know the regional manager. I'll give him a call. And the house? Chloe asked, looking up through her tears. I looked at her. I didn't feel the anger anymore. I just felt tired. I'll pay the arrears to stop the foreclosure, but then we're selling it. We'll split the remaining equity, and you'll find a place you can actually afford on your own. No more Audi. No more chef dreams on my dime. You're leaving again, Liam said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a realization. I have a life in Seattle, I said. A quiet one. I like it there. I walked back through the house. It felt smaller than I remembered. I got into my car and started the long drive back to the city. My phone buzzed about an hour into the trip. A text from Liam. Thanks, Mark, for everything. We really messed up. I didn't reply. I just kept driving. I'd done enough. A month later, the house was on the market and the boys were working at the coffee shop. I got a check for my half of the house equity. It wasn't much after the late fees and the repairs, but it was enough. I put it into a college fund for my nephew. I didn't want any of that money. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd finally closed the book. But then, on a Tuesday morning, I got a notification on my phone, an Instagram tag. I opened it. It was a photo of Liam and Mason in their green coffee shop aprons. They were smiling, looking exhausted but proud. The caption read, Day 1, learning how to actually run a business. No shortcuts. I liked the photo. Then I blocked them. Not because I hated them, but because I knew that if I kept watching, I'd eventually want to help. I'd see a struggle and want to fix it. I'd see a mistake and want to pay for it. And I'd finally learned that the most expensive thing you can give someone is the chance to never grow up. I put my phone face down on the desk and got back to my code. The rain was hitting the window in a steady, perfect rhythm. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. I was finally done. Until the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the security camera on my phone. Standing in the hallway of my high-rise was a woman I didn't recognize. She looked looked to be in her late 20s, professional, holding a briefcase. I opened the door. "Can I help you? Mark Harrison?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Sarah Miller. My father is the woodworker you paid off back home," I sighed. "Look, Sarah, I told your father to keep that quiet. I don't need a thank you. I'm not here to thank you," she said, and she didn't look happy. "I'm a forensic accountant. When my dad told me what happened, I started looking into the LLC Greg set up for the boys. You were right about the fraud, but you missed something. Something big." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Greg didn't just use the boys' names. He used yours. He forged your signature as a personal guarantor on a secondary lease for a warehouse space on the edge of town. A 10-year lease with a massive early termination penalty." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I never signed anything." "I know," she said, "but the landlord just filed for bankruptcy, and the court is looking for the guarantors to settle the debt. They're coming for $250,000, Mark, and since you're the only one with any actual assets, they're coming for you first." I stared at the folder in her hand. The hallway suddenly felt very warm, the ambient noise of the building's ventilation system loud in my ears. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just looked at this stranger standing in my doorway, holding a bomb in a manila envelope. I stepped back and pulled the door open wider. "Come in." Sarah walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She didn't look around at the view of the skyline or the sleek furniture. She went straight to the kitchen island, set her briefcase down, and unclasped it. "I didn't want to do this over the phone," she said, pulling out a thick stack of stapled paper. "My dad thinks you're a decent guy. He told me to just send you an email, but in my line of work, when I see a mess this toxic, I prefer to look the person in the eye so I know if they're in on it or if they're the mark." She slid the document across the granite counter. It was a standard commercial real estate lease, 24 pages. The property was a 10,000 square foot industrial warehouse on the county line, about 20 miles from the downtown storefront I'd originally bought. Monthly rent, $8,500. It was a triple net lease, meaning the tenant was responsible for rent, plus all building insurance, maintenance, and property taxes. The tenant listed was G&S Hospitality LLC. "Go to page 22, Sarah said. I flipped the heavy pages. My fingers felt slightly numb. There it was, the personal guarantee section. This is the clause landlords use for new LLCs to make sure that if the business goes under, there is a warm body with a bank account they can sue for the balance. Printed clearly under the guarantor line was my name, Mark Harrison. Next to it was my signature. I stared at the ink. It was a good forgery, really good. It had the same sharp angle on the M and the lazy loop on the H that I'd been doing since I was 20. If you put it in front of me and asked if I signed it, I would have had to think about it for a second. "How did he get this?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow. "Look at the date," she said. "October 14th. That was 3 weeks before I received that 11:14 p.m. email from Chloe. 3 weeks before I even knew Greg was back in the picture as an equity partner. During that time, I was working 70-hour weeks between my software job and gutting the downtown building. He had access to the house," I said, piecing it together. "Chloe must have let him in while I was at work or at the site. My home office file cabinet. It wasn't locked. I had old tax returns in there, mortgage documents, vendor contracts for the restaurant equipment. He had plenty of material to trace," Sarah agreed, crossing her arms. "But tracing a signature isn't enough for a $250,000 commercial lease. Landlords usually require a guarantor to sign in person, or at the very least, provide a notarized signature. So how did he?" I trailed off. I flipped to page 23, the notary acknowledgement block. There was a blue ink stamp pressed onto the page. State of Washington, Notary Public. The name on the stamp was Chloe Harrison. Underneath the stamp, in my ex-wife's familiar, loopy handwriting, was her signature, swearing under penalty of perjury that Mark Harrison had personally appeared before her and signed the document. I closed my eyes. The sheer, unfathomable stupidity of it hit me like a physical blow in the chest. "She notarized my forged signature for her deadbeat ex-boyfriend," I whispered. "It gets worse," Sarah said quietly. "The landlord of that warehouse is a corporate holding company that just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy restructuring. The bankruptcy trustee has taken over all their accounts. The trustee doesn't care about excuses, and they don't care about drama. They just look at the ledger. G&S Hospitality stopped paying rent 3 months ago. The lease has an acceleration clause for default. The trustee is calling in the entire 10-year value of the lease, minus mitigation. They are preparing to file a lien against you, Mark." I opened my eyes and looked at her. "Why do you care? Why are you here instead of just letting the court serve me?" Sarah sighed and leaned against the counter. "Because Greg didn't just lease an empty warehouse. He used it as a delivery address. Remember the $85,000 in local vendor debts you paid off? Yeah, that was just the stuff he ordered for the downtown storefront," she said. "Once he secured this warehouse, he went on a buying spree. He ordered commercial refrigeration units, forklift equipment, pallets of high-end dry goods, and he used my dad's company as a credit reference. He told the suppliers that Miller Custom Woodwork was a partner in the warehouse expansion." I swore softly. "Yeah," Sarah said. "The bankruptcy trustee is auditing the warehouse tenant. They saw my dad's name on the credit applications. My dad got a subpoena yesterday for all his business records. He's terrified, Mark. He's an old man who builds cabinets. He doesn't understand federal bankruptcy court. I paid him," I said. "He's clear of the LLC." "He is, but the court doesn't know that yet, and dealing with a subpoena costs thousands in lawyer fees," Sarah said. "I tracked this down because I wanted to know who we were fighting. I pulled the lease from the county clerk records. When I saw your name as the guarantor and Chloe as the notary, I knew exactly what Greg had done. He built a shadow company using your credit and the boys' LLC, stripped all the assets he ordered, and left the shell to collapse." I picked up the lease. The paper felt heavy, radioactive. "What do you need from me, Sarah?" "I need you to go nuclear," she said flatly. "If you try to fight this quietly, or if you try to negotiate with the trustee, my dad gets dragged through a year of depositions. The only way this stops immediately is if you file a formal police report for identity theft and felony fraud against Greg, and by extension, Chloe. You have to hand the trustee a police report case number proving the guarantee is a criminal forgery. The moment you do that, the liability shifts entirely to them, and the trustee leaves you and my dad alone." I looked out the window. The Seattle rain was still falling. It had looked peaceful an hour ago. Now it just looked cold. If I filed that police report, it wouldn't just be a civil issue. issue anymore. Chloe had used her state-issued notary stamp to facilitate a massive financial crime. The state doesn't look kindly on notaries who commit fraud. She would be facing real prison time. And the boys were the registered agents of G&S Hospitality. They were the ones whose names were on the lease as the primary tenants. Greg had made sure his name wasn't legally bound to a single piece of paper. He was just a consultant or an advisor. If I pulled this trigger, the mother of the boys I helped raise was going to be indicted. The boys themselves would likely be named as co-conspirators until they could prove they were just useful idiots. I need to call my lawyer, I said. You have 24 hours, Sarah said, zipping her briefcase shut. The bankruptcy court is filing the asset freeze motions on Friday morning. If your accounts get frozen, you won't even be able to pay your lawyer. She left a copy of the lease on the counter and walked out. I stood in the quiet kitchen for 10 minutes before I picked up my phone and called David, the attorney who had handled the swift dismissal of Chloe's ridiculous demand letter 2 months ago. I explained the situation. I sent him photos of the lease, specifically the signature page and the notary stamp. David was silent for a long time on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of its usual professional warmth. Mark, listen to me very carefully, David said. Do not contact Chloe. Do not contact Liam or Mason. Do not send a text, an email, or make a phone call. I wasn't planning on it. I'm serious. This is no longer a messy family dispute. This is a $250,000 federal bankruptcy issue, intertwined with felony wire fraud, identity theft, and notary fraud. If you contact them and warn them, the court can view that as collusion. You could be charged as an accessory after the fact. I rubbed my temples. I'm the victim here, David. The court doesn't know that yet. To the court, you are a guy with a lot of cash who guaranteed a lease for a business run by his stepsons. That looks completely normal on paper. The only way to prove it's not normal is to burn them down. If I report the forgery, Chloe goes down for it. Yes, David said. She will lose her notary license, she will likely face felony charges, and she will be financially ruined. But Mark, if you don't report it, you are legally accepting the debt. Are you prepared to write a check for $250,000 to protect a woman who helped her ex-boyfriend steal your identity? No, the answer came instantly. I didn't even have to think about it. Good, come to my office in an hour. We're calling the police department in your old town, the district attorney for that county, and the federal bankruptcy trustee. We are going to bury them in paperwork before they can file the lien. I hung up. I went to the bedroom, put on a suit, and grabbed my keys. I spent the next 6 hours in David's conference room. It was an exhausting, humiliating process. I had to sit there while David and a detective on speakerphone went through every detail of my life, my marriage, and my divorce. I had to explain exactly how Greg had manipulated his way back into the house. I had to provide handwriting samples. By 4 p.m., the police report was filed. David immediately emailed the case number and an affidavit of forgery to the bankruptcy trustee's legal team in California. It's done, David said, closing his laptop. The trustee will halt the collection efforts against you. They'll pivot all their fire onto the LLC, the boys, and Chloe. The local DA will likely issue warrants by early next week. I drove home in silence. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a cold, heavy exhaustion. I had done what I had to do. I had protected myself, but the thought of what was coming for Liam and Mason sat like a stone in my gut. They were arrogant, stupid kids who had wanted to play businessman with a con artist. They didn't deserve federal indictments, but I couldn't save them anymore. I walked into my apartment, threw my keys on the counter, and opened the fridge. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a notification from my banking app. Alert. Action required. Please contact customer service regarding a restriction on your account. My stomach dropped. I opened the app. My checking account balance was grayed out. Next to it was a red padlock icon. I checked my savings. Padlock icon. My investment portfolio. Padlock icon. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I dialed the bank's automated number, punched in my details, and finally got a human on the line. This is Mark Harrison, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My accounts are locked. All of them. One moment, Mr. Harrison, the representative said. I heard the clacking of a keyboard. Ah, yes. I see a hold was placed on all linked accounts under your social security number at 3:15 p.m. Pacific time. By who? There is a federal hold order attached to a Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceeding in the Northern District of California, the rep read in a monotone voice. The creditor is listing you as a primary guarantor in default. I had my lawyer file an affidavit of forgery with the trustee 2 hours ago, I said, my voice rising despite myself. This is a fraudulent debt. I understand, sir, but the hold order was processed by the court this morning. We are legally obligated to freeze the assets until we receive a direct release order from the federal judge handling the bankruptcy. How long does that take? Usually it requires a motion to be filed and a hearing to be scheduled, she said. It could be anywhere from 30 to 90 days. Until then, the accounts cannot be accessed for withdrawals, transfers, or debit card purchases. I hung up. I stood in the middle of my expensive condo. 30 to 90 days. I couldn't pay my rent. I couldn't buy groceries. I couldn't even pay David to file the motion to unfreeze the accounts. I had been so focused on filing the police report and warning the trustee, I hadn't realized the legal machinery was already moving faster than I was. Greg hadn't just set a trap. He had set a timer. My phone lit up again. This time, it was a text message. Not from Chloe. Not from Liam or Mason. It was from Greg. Heard you made some calls today, Mark. You shouldn't have done that. Look at your email. I left you a present. I walked over to my laptop on the kitchen island. I opened my email. There was a message from an anonymous Proton Mail account. Attached was an audio file. I clicked play. The recording was staticky, clearly recorded on a phone in a pocket or set on a table. It was from the day I went to the house, the day I confronted them in the backyard. I heard my own voice, clear as day. The bank is opening a formal investigation tomorrow morning. If you lie to them to protect him, you're complicit in wire fraud. If you tell the truth, you might get some of that money back, but Greg goes to jail. Then, a pause, and then my voice again. I'll pay the arrears to stop the foreclosure, but then we're selling it. The recording cut off. I stared at the screen. It wasn't a confession. I hadn't said anything illegal. But out of context, to a police detective or a bankruptcy trustee who didn't know the whole story, it sounded exactly like a man threatening his family with criminal charges to force the sale of a house. house. It sounded like extortion. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Greg. I sent a copy of that tape to the local DA. I told them you forced Chloe to notarize that warehouse lease by threatening to foreclose on her house. I told them you set the whole LLC up to fail so you could claim the losses on your tech company's taxes. The boys backed me up. They told the cops they were terrified of you. I felt the blood roaring in my ears. You wanted to play with the police, Mark? The next text read. Let's play. I didn't reply. I didn't throw the phone across the room. I just set it down on the granite counter and listened to the rain hit the glass. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a heavy leather belt around my ribs and pulled it taut. I had spent 15 years building a life that was insulated from this kind of chaos. Good credit, solid savings, a career that paid me to solve logical problems in a quiet room. And in less than 24 hours, Greg had weaponized my entire existence against me, using nothing but a cheap burner phone and a stolen signature. I called David. He picked up on the second ring. I read him the texts. I played the audio file holding my phone up to the speaker. David let out a long, heavy exhale. Okay, this is what con artists do, Mark. When you shine a light on them, they throw dirt in the air. He's trying to muddy the waters. Did he actually go to the DA with this? Probably, David said. It's a preemptive strike. If the DA gets an extortion complaint before they get our forgery affidavit, they have to look at both. It slows everything down. A lazy prosecutor might look at this mess, see a bitter divorce and a property dispute, and decide it's a civil matter, not criminal. That's Greg's play. He doesn't need to prove you extorted anyone. He just needs to make it complicated enough that the cops don't want to deal with it. And the boys? I asked, the words tasting like ash. Did they actually back him up? We don't know that, David said firmly. Greg is a liar. Assume he's lying about this too. But Mark, listen to me. This makes the no contact rule absolute. If you reach out to Liam or Mason to ask if they talk to the cops, it looks like witness tampering. You are in a box right now. You have to stay in it. My accounts are frozen, David. All of them. Checking, savings, the brokerage account. The bank said it's a federal hold from the bankruptcy trustee. There was a pause. They moved fast. Faster than I anticipated. I have $42 in my wallet, I said. My voice sounded thin, embarrassing. I have half a tank of gas. I have a rent payment due on the 1st of the month. How do I pay you to fix this if I can't buy a cup of coffee? I'll defer my billing, David said. We've worked together enough. But Mark, you need cash to live. You need to figure out a bridge for the next 30 days while I file the motions to lift the federal hold. Borrow from a friend. Ask for a payroll advance. Whatever you do not take out a payday loan and do not try to open a new line of credit. The trustee will see it as you trying to hide assets. I hung up. I walked into my bedroom and opened my nightstand. I found a jar of loose change and a couple of emergency $20 bills folded under an old passport. I laid the money out on the bed. $82. I was a senior software architect making low six figures, and I was counting quarters on my bedspread like a college freshman. I barely slept. The next morning, I drove to the office instead of working remotely. I needed to see my manager, Paul. Paul was a good guy. Pragmatic, quiet, mostly cared about sprint velocity and clean code. I knocked on his glass door at 9 a.m. Hey, Mark, come on in. What's up? He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. I sat down. I felt the heat rising in my neck. I had never asked another man for money in my life. Paul, I need a massive favor. It's embarrassing, to be honest. He put his pen down. Everything okay at home? I'm the victim of a pretty severe identity theft, I said, keeping my eyes on the bridge of his nose. Someone forged my signature on a commercial lease in another state, and the landlord just filed for bankruptcy. The federal trustee put a blanket freeze on my social security number. All my accounts are locked until my lawyer can clear it up. Paul winced. Man, that's a nightmare. The credit bureaus are useless with that stuff. Yeah, the problem is, I don't have access to cash for day-to-day expenses. I need to request a payroll advance. Just a month's salary, paid out as a paper check so I can cash it at a branch that doesn't have a hold on me. I know it's not standard. Paul leaned back, lacing his fingers together. HR handles that, but they usually only approve advances for medical emergencies or sudden bereavements. I can go to bat for you, though. Identity theft is no joke. Let me talk to Sarah in HR and see if we can push an exception through. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. Keep it quiet if you can. Of course, he said. I went to my desk and tried to work. I stared at lines of Python, but the code looked like a foreign language. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach lurched. I expected it to be Greg, or David, or the bank. At 2 p.m., the phone buzzed. It was an unsaved number, but with the area code from my old town. I ignored it. It buzzed again. Same number. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, my desk phone rang. The internal line. It was Paul. Hey, Mark, can you come back to my office? Sarah from HR is here. His tone was completely different. The relaxed, empathetic manager from this morning was gone. He sounded formal, guarded. I walked down the hall, the fluorescent lights suddenly feeling far too bright. When I stepped into Paul's office, the head of HR was sitting in the corner chair, holding a yellow legal pad. Close the door, Mark, Sarah said. I closed it and sat down. Mark, Sarah began, avoiding eye contact. We received a phone call about an hour ago on the main company line. It was routed to HR. It was a Detective Miller from the county sheriff's department in your former state. The floor felt like it was dropping out from under me. Okay, he was calling to verify your employment, Sarah continued, which is standard for certain background checks. But he also asked if you had requested any sudden changes to your direct deposit, or if you had attempted to pull from your 401k. I haven't touched my 401k, I said defensively, and I just asked Paul for a payroll advance because my accounts are frozen due to the fraud I told you about. Detective Miller stated that you are currently a person of interest in an active investigation regarding financial extortion and real estate fraud, Sarah said, reading directly from her notes. He informed us that there are allegations you used your position and income to illegally coerce a former family member. That is a lie, I said, my voice hardening. My ex-wife's boyfriend forged my name on a $250,000 lease. I am the one who filed the police report. I am the victim. Paul looked at me, his face tight. Mark, the detective said you submitted a forged document to a federal bankruptcy court to avoid paying a debt, and that you are attempting to frame your ex-wife for it to force the sale of her home. I sat in stunned silence. Greg hadn't just muddied the waters. He had flipped the entire narrative. He took the tape, went to the cops, and told them Times was the con artist. artist. He spun a story that I guaranteed the lease for the boys, realized it was a bad investment, and was now trying to fake a forgery to escape the bankruptcy, using the threat of foreclosure to silence Chloe. It was brilliant. It was perfectly, diabolically believable. A wealthy, bitter ex-husband trying to crush his ex-wife's new family. I can provide my lawyer's contact information, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. He can send you the actual filings, the real police report I made. Sarah held up a hand. Mark, we don't need to see legal documents. We are not a court. However, the company has strict policies regarding employees who are under active criminal investigation, especially involving financial crimes. You have administrative access to our client databases. You handle sensitive payment gateways. You're suspending me. It's a paid administrative leave, pending the resolution of the investigation, Sarah said, her voice devoid of any warmth. We are disabling your badge and your network access effective immediately. We need your company laptop, and we need you to vacate the premises. It's paid leave, Mark, Paul added gently, looking genuinely miserable. Your salary will still deposit. You can't be here until this is cleared up. My direct deposit goes into a frozen account, Paul, I said, looking at him. I can't access the money. I'm sorry, Sarah said. We cannot issue a paper check advance to an employee under suspension for suspected financial fraud. It's a massive liability. I didn't argue. There was no point. I handed Paul my laptop. I took my keys off the company lanyard and placed the plastic badge on the desk. I walked out of the building into the gray Seattle afternoon. I had $82 to my name. I was locked out of my own money, and I had just been effectively escorted out of my job like a criminal. I got into my car and just sat there. The rain beat it on the windshield. I looked at the dashboard clock. 2:45 p.m. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from the unsaved number that had called me earlier. I opened it. Mark, it's Mason. Please don't tell David I'm texting you. I know you're not supposed to talk to us, but you need to know what Greg is doing. He didn't just go to the police about you. He went to the bank this morning. He told them you authorized him to use the $30K loan for consulting fees. He showed them an email from your old account. Mom is terrified. She's drinking again. I don't know what to do. He won't let us leave the house. I stared at the words on the screen. The rain hit the windshield in heavy, rhythmic thuds. He won't let us leave the house. That wasn't financial fraud. That wasn't a clever manipulation of a bankruptcy court or a fabricated email. That was domestic abuse. That was a desperate con artist realizing the walls were closing in and resorting to physical control to keep his story straight. I didn't reply to Mason. I didn't want to alert Greg that I was involved. Instead, I took a screenshot of the text. Then I forwarded it to David with a single line. Get me Detective Miller's direct line. Right now. David didn't ask questions. 2 minutes later, a 10-digit number popped up on my screen. I dialed it. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Miller. Detective, this is Mark Harrison, I said. There was a sharp silence on the other end. Mr. Harrison, your HR department works fast. I was just about to have the Seattle police serve you with a formal request for an interview. I'll give you any interview you want, I said, my voice cold and entirely steady. But right now, you need to send a patrol car to my former residence. Greg is currently holding my ex-wife and her 2 sons in the house against their will. He's isolating your witnesses. Mr. Harrison, if you're trying to swat your ex-wife's house because of a financial dispute, I just sent a screenshot of a text message to the email address listed on your department directory, I interrupted. It's from Mason. He states Greg is refusing to let them leave and is actively manipulating banking records with forged emails. You called my employer today because Greg told you I was extorting them. Go to the house, separate the boys from Greg, and ask them who they're actually terrified of. I didn't wait for him to respond. I hung up. There was nothing left for me to do. I couldn't drive down there. I couldn't force my way in. I just had to sit in my car in a corporate parking lot in Seattle with $82 to my name and wait. The next 4 hours were the longest of my life. I drove back to my condo, parked in the garage, and sat on my couch in the dark. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't make anything to eat. I just watched the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass. At 7:15 p.m., my phone rang. It was David. Mark. He sounded exhausted, but there was a sharp edge of triumph in his voice. It's over. I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 6 months. What happened? Miller sent 2 cruisers to the house for a welfare check, David said. When they arrived, Greg tried to play the concerned father. He told the cops the boys were having a mental health crisis. But Miller is a veteran. He separated everyone. He took Mason out to the porch. Mason cracked in about 3 minutes. He told him the truth? He told him everything, David said. He told him about the consulting fee email being a fake. He told him Greg had been holding their phones hostage for the last 24 hours to make sure they didn't contradict his story to the DA. And then Miller went inside and talked to Chloe. I closed my eyes. How bad is it for her? She was intoxicated, David said flatly, and terrified. When Miller asked her about the notary stamp on the warehouse lease, she broke down. She confessed to stamping the document without you present. She claimed Greg pressured her into it, which is probably true, but the confession is on body cam. It's done, Mark. The forgery is confirmed. Where is Greg? In county lockup. They ran his ID when they got there. Remember those outstanding warrants for child support in Florida you mentioned? They were still active. They arrested him on the warrants on the spot. It gives the DA 72 hours to formally draft the felony wire fraud, identity theft, and witness tampering charges. I leaned my head back against the couch. And the bankruptcy trustee? The hold? Miller already called them, David said. With the primary suspect in custody and a recorded confession from the notary admitting the guarantor's signature was fraudulent, the trustee has zero legal standing to maintain the hold. I'm filing the emergency release motion first thing tomorrow morning. The judge will rubber stamp it. Your accounts will be unfrozen by tomorrow afternoon. Thank you, David. Don't thank me yet. I'm sending you my bill tomorrow. He paused. Mark, you did the right thing. You didn't take the bait. You let him hang himself. We hung up. The next few days were a blur of bureaucratic unspooling. True to David's word, the padlocks on my banking app vanished by Wednesday at 3 p.m. I transferred David his retainer and paid my rent. I ordered a very expensive steak from a delivery app and ate it at my kitchen island in complete silence. On Thursday morning, I got a call from Paul. He was incredibly apologetic. HR had received a formal clearance from the sheriff's department confirming I was the victim of identity theft, not a suspect. My suspension was lifted with full back pay, and Paul offered me an extra week of paid time off to deal with the stress. I took it. On Friday, I received an email from Sarah Miller, the forensic accountant. It was short. The subpoena for my dad's business was withdrawn. The trustee is going after the LLC and Greg directly. Thank you for doing the hard thing. I didn't hear from Chloe or the boys for a long time. I didn't expect to, and I didn't want to. It wasn't until 6 months later that I found out how it all finally settled. I was scrolling through a local news site from my old town, checking the real estate listings out of morbid curiosity. I saw the house, my old house. It was listed as a bank-owned foreclosure. The interior photos showed it completely empty, the custom kitchen I'd built looking cold and vacant. I did a quick public records search. Chloe had pleaded out. In exchange for testifying against Greg, she avoided prison time, but she permanently lost her notary commission and was hit with a mountain of civil fines. The bank had seized the house. Greg was sentenced to 5 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, exacerbated by the identity theft. The boys' LLC was liquidated. They were saddled with the remaining debt that Greg had racked up in their names. It would take them a decade to climb out of the financial hole they'd dug for themselves, trying to impress a man who saw them as nothing more than a credit score. I closed the browser tab. I walked over to the window of my condo. The Seattle rain had finally stopped, leaving the sky a crisp, brilliant blue. The city looked clean, washed new. I poured myself a cup of coffee. I didn't feel a sense of triumphant joy. There was no grand parade. It was just quiet. A deep, heavy, permanent quiet. I had spent 2 years funding a family that didn't respect me, and 6 months fighting a ghost that tried to destroy me. I had paid the price of admission, but I was out. I was finally, truly out. I took a sip of my coffee, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. It was time to get back to work.